Okay, sweet. About 2 minutes after the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. I hope everyone's staying safe and staying healthy wherever you are in this wide world. Today, we have some special guests with us. We're going to talk about some Kaleido developer tools and focus primarily on Truffle. So joining from the Truffle team, we have Kevin Bluer. He does a lot of different things at Truffle, wears a lot of hats, but primarily leading the ecosystem and a lot of the curriculum training that they do at Truffle. Very hands-on developer as well, so he'll be able to dig into some of the code and show you guys some of the more esoteric features and nuances of Truffle. So really excited to have him. And then from our team at Kaleido, we also have Gabriel Indick. He's a full stack developer. He's worked on a number of the features that we have in the Kaleido platform and has also worked extensively on a number of client projects, building out not only the smart contract logic Solidity code, but all of the integrations and user-facing application tiers. So super stoked to have these two guys with us. Just a few quick pieces of admin before we get rolling. Please do not hesitate to use the chat or the Q&A to ask any questions. We have a handful of panelists, so everyone can kind of take turns moderating when someone else is speaking. This will be recorded. We will share the slides. We will share the recording. And then we have links to where you guys can consume all of these resources as well. And I'll share those in the chat. So without further ado, let me share some slides, set the table, and then we'll dive right into it. So getting started. At a very high level, Kaleido is a full stack digital transformation platform. So one of our core features is, of course, blockchain as a service. We have, all of the best of breed open source protocols for Ethereum, Enterprise Ethereum, Geth, Quorum, Hyperledger, Besu. We also have support for CORDA Open OS now as well. Three tenets that really define Kaleido: built for modern business networks, so very much industry use case agnostic. We've seen production projects span trade finance, span supply chain, pharmaceutical, government agencies, et cetera. So we provide the runtime, we provide the infrastructure, the tooling, the APIs for you to go ahead and build out the bespoke use case, the bespoke project for your industry, your vertical. Number two, radically simple. You'll see this both within the console inside of the user interface, but also at the administrative and at the programmatic level. So very clean REST APIs for not just talking to Ethereum and talking to smart contracts, but actually leveraging and stitching together all of the ancillary services that we have in Kaleido. And then the last one, very, very much built for the enterprise. And I have a slide that touches on all of the first-class features you just get out of the box by running on Kaleido. Our approach to enterprise blockchain and all projects for that matter is really to flatten the curve, no pun intended, during this pandemic. But we try to make it very easy to adopt the technology, not have to concern yourself with P2P messaging, crypto primitives, and a lot of those low-level things that can turn into barriers for people that are new to any of the blockchain protocols. As you sort of progress throughout your project, we make it very easy to decentralize your network, operate with what we call shared IT, different autonomous organizations having unilateral control, and then have the confidence to actually run this thing in production across the globe in different data centers on different clouds, and actually driving transactions at scale on your network. Super quickly, one thing that we've noticed over the last 3 years working with all sorts of customers is that the blockchain itself is incredibly, incredibly important. But actually, when you take a step back and start looking at everything that goes into what we would call a full stack app, it's actually only 5 to 10 to maybe 15% of the overall stack. And we see the need for a lot of services and a lot of answers around data, around the transaction layer. How are we going to do public or private transactions? How are we going to configure our protocol for optimal throughput or privacy? How are we going to consume events coming off the blockchain and start automating business processes into our existing cloud estates and our existing back office systems? How are we going to connect to our existing back office systems? How are we going to get external data feeds from oracles, for example? How are our apps going to talk to each other, and not just talk to each other, but communicate securely? And then at the very top of the stack, kind of the fun layer, and we'll touch on this today, but how do we make it very, very easy to actually develop an app and create a really lovely user experience. So in Kaleido, you'll see this in one of our demos. We've done a lot of work around digital assets, tokenization, around a lot of bleeding edge crypto techniques like zero knowledge proofs. And then we've done a lot of work on trying to abstract some of the complexities with Ethereum and with other protocols, making it very easy to speak to your smart contracts. Quick snapshot of that diverse, eclectic collection of customers running on Kaleido. We see that we have major financial institutions, energy majors, entertainment, et cetera. So really a testament to the fact that Kaleido is truly industry and vertical agnostic. Some of those bullet points I promised I'd touch on with regards to enterprise. So Kaleido is ISO 27001, 17, and 18 certified. Tons of techniques around key management. On previous Tech Tuesdays, we've gone through the whole bevy of different techniques that we have, including having your private Ethereum keys held in a cloud HSM. We've done a lot of work around enterprise identity constructs, weaving in X509 certificates into your consortium layer and into your Ethereum layer. And then just some other things. You get HA, you get DR, you get auto scaling out of the box. And we have a lot of available cloud integrations, whether it's for key management, whether it's for business continuity and backups, whether it's log streams, et cetera. I'll also note that we do support running Kaleido, what we call private stack, in a private cloud provider like GCP or even in your on-premise data center. So I'll leave some links and some email addresses and we can talk about that offline. Last thing I want to touch on, Kaleido, we do have the standard software as a service model where you're essentially just incurring the runtime costs for nodes and services. But we also recognize that lots of different companies and lots of different projects are at different stages. Some are at the sandbox development stage, some are getting closer to pilot, some are getting closer to production. And we're happy to work with you to construct some time-boxed bespoke packages to sort of meet you where your budget exists and meet you where your project exists as well. So happy to talk about those offline as well. And then the last thing I'll mention, just by attending today, someone is going to win one of our fantastic Kaleido t-shirts. These are, I think they're American Apparel, but they're incredibly, incredibly comfortable. So someone's going to get lucky just by attending this. And then also, if you go ahead and follow us on LinkedIn and just leave ideally a thoughtful comment when we share this recording, that'll also enter you to win a t-shirt as well. So that's it for the preamble and the slides, and now we'll get into the actual exciting stuff. So as I mentioned, we're going to focus on developer tools, with a primary focus on Truffle today. But just to give everyone an idea, we also support, a lot of the different, Ethereum tools out there. So MetaMask, Remix, OpenZeppelin, and then we've developed a few things internally at Kaleido, specifically a CLI, a Go driver that really makes it easy to simulate a horizontally scaled application, test your throughput, test your loops, and test your workloads. So these are very accessible inside of our developer section in the docs. And then one of these is actually the Truffle suite documentation. So what we're going to do today is we're going to actually focus on the Drizzle Kaleido box. This is a very basic box, but it actually gives you a React front end. So kind of mimics, a very elementary level Ethereum application. So this is accessible directly within the documentation, or if you just go to the Truffle website and look at their boxes, you'll see the two boxes we have here, the basic Kaleido box and the Drizzle box that has the front end. So what I've done is I've already created a blockchain network inside of Kaleido, and I've stood up an environment inside of it, and that's our nomenclature for a blockchain. And I'm going to use some of these resources, obviously, to connect my configuration inside of Truffle to Kaleido. So here's my business network, called it testnet. It's just running in AWS in Columbus, Ohio. And within this business network, I've created a single environment. Went ahead and called it the Truffle dev environment. And we see inside of it, I have two nodes, node 1, node 2, both owned by a single organization, and we're running Geth and proof of authority. Super quickly for folks that are maybe new to Kaleido, I know we have some Truffle-centric folks in the audience here, but with a few clicks inside of the Kaleido console, you can very easily create a business network or a consortium. Pick your nomenclature. And then once you've done that, you can go ahead and create a blockchain. And like I said, we call that an environment. We give you two doors to go through, Ethereum and CORDA. You just have to provide a name for it, like development, like UAT, like pre-production. Choose if you want it to be cloud only. If you do want support for on-premise, just go ahead and contact us. Click next. You're going to choose the protocol, Geth, Quorum, Besu, and the accompanying algorithm, and then you click finish. And that's a namespace, that's a container, and you can start bringing it to life by creating nodes. It's really, really that simple, and there are also administrative APIs that'll make that possible as well. So just giving everyone an idea of how to sort of go through the basic flow inside of Kaleido. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that Kaleido drizzle box, and we'll go ahead and do a migration. We'll do some local tests, and then we'll stand up that actual drizzle component, the React component, and we'll invoke it with a simple transaction that easily integrates with our MetaMask instance. So I'll click on the dashboard for my environment, and we see that we have our 2 nodes. So I'm going to click node number 1 here. And what we're concerned with in Kaleido is we want the RPC endpoint for our node, but we're also going to need what we refer to as some application credentials. And these are 256-bit strongly generated credentials that give us secure TLS authentication over basic auth to Kaleido. So every node, every service in Kaleido is protected by boundary security. So whether you're submitting an Ethereum transaction or whether you're talking to one of our ancillary services that I touched on in that full stack diagram, you're gonna need secure credentials, or you're gonna need a bearer token to have that authentication into Kaleido. And now there's 2 ways we can sort of access these application credentials. I can use this connect application button right here, and we'll get a modal that pops up asking me to create new app credentials. I can just go ahead and click create. And what this will do is this will actually generate us that username password pair. And then for convenience, we'll inject, we'll actually create you that fully qualified URL with that username password inline. So for us to be able to speak to Kaleido using the Truffle library, using the Truffle config, these are the strings that we're concerned with, this basic auth string and actually this endpoint here. So I'm going to go into my console here, and I've already unboxed this Truffle Drizzle Kaleido box. This takes a couple minutes because you have to download all of those Web3 modules and all the supporting components for React. So I'm going to go ahead and forego that process of making everyone watch my terminal. So I'm just going to open up a quick editor right here, and we'll look at the directory, we'll look at the library for this project right here. So we see here we have our Truffle Drizzle. And what we're specifically concerned with is this Truffle config file that we have here. And we see that it's asking for our application credentials and the URL endpoint for our node. Now, we can grab those very, very easily from this screen right here. However, if we go back to the Kaleido Classic console, we have an even easier button, and we'll be migrating this functionality into V2 of Kaleido very, very shortly. But if we go ahead and click on node number 1, similarly to what I just did inside of the V2 of Kaleido, I can click on this connect node button. I can go through our native JSON RPC door right here, click view details. I'm going to generate some new application credentials, and now I can hop down to this Truffle suite section here inside of this panel. And we're going to be using that Drizzle Kaleido box, as I mentioned. But what we do is we actually give you those arguments right here inline. So I can go ahead and copy that application credential. I can paste that inside of my config file right here. And then I can go ahead and copy that URL and paste that as well. So there's the username :password, hop back in here, and then I'll grab that connection URL. And then we see at the very bottom, when we're going to run our full stack app, when we're going to run the front end, we're going to actually sign with our private key that's held in MetaMask. So this is that fully qualified URL that will securely connect to Kaleido with a custom RPC in MetaMask. So let me copy these 2 strings super quickly, paste these inside of my Truffle config right here, and I'll go ahead and save this, and we can get started. So this is really all we need to talk to Kaleido. Gas price is set to 0 when we're talking to a permissioned Ethereum network. And then we just need some arbitrary gas for the EVM opcode execution. You can see here commented out, if we are using Quorum, you'll need a different argument that specifies Quorum as your node client, as your provider type. So we're good to go here. And what we'll do to start with is we'll use a local instance of Ganache. We'll use the Truffle develop console right here, and then we'll just go ahead and test our compile, our test, and our migrate. And then if everything works as expected, we can go ahead and actually do our migration up to Kaleido. So here we are in the develop console. I'll just go ahead and go with compile to start with. We're using simple storage in this scenario. I would actually show the source code, but it's so simple that it's really not worth any time. It takes a single positive integer and it has one method, a set method. And then there's an event that emits every time you upsert a new value or overwrite the existing global variable. So there's the compile. First next we'll do the test, excuse me. And then lastly, we'll do the test migrate within our Ganache instance. And Kevin and Gabriel are going to touch more, Kevin probably is going to touch more on Ganache and some of the nuances that are available for you there. So these both pass locally, and then we can finally just call our migrate command against Ganache. So that worked perfectly. We're good to go here. .exit. Let me just clear this. And now we can go ahead and send these up to actual Kaleido here. So call Truffle migrate. This should take 5 to 10 seconds for these to all get kicked up to our Kaleido network. And while these are coming through, what we can actually do is we can hop back to our Kaleido V2 console, and using our convenient data explorer, we can see these transactions come in real time. So go ahead and click on your data explorer tab right there, click your block explorer, and we'll see the injection of our migration file, of our simple storage file, and then the acknowledgement of those deployments into the migration. So good to go there. Not incredibly interesting, but a very basic example of using Truffle against a secure Kaleido endpoint. So the last thing I'm going to show you guys is just the Drizzle component or the React component. So change into the app directory right here. For this to work, it's going to integrate with MetaMask. So the final thing that we actually need, we need that fully qualified URL that we created. So I can go back to the old console and I'll just simply grab that and I'll create a custom RPC inside of MetaMask. So I'll go back to this connect node button, view those details. I'll generate a new set of credentials here. And then we're going to grab this string at the very bottom right here. Let me move my zoom bar, which always seems to be in the way. So we can copy this string right here. I'll open up my MetaMask instance, my plugin inside of the browser. Go ahead and drop down and create a custom RPC. Call this, there we go, Kaleido Truffle endpoint. Just go ahead and paste that guy right there and then click save at the bottom. So this securely injects us into Kaleido. It's going to sign with the private key that's persisted inside of my MetaMask instance here. So the last thing we need to do is just go ahead and kick off this application. So npm run start. This will take, I don't know, 20, 30 seconds for this to fully come up. We'll have a localhost browser that we can interact with. And then we will round this out by just upserting a new positive integer into our simple storage smart contract. So once this actually comes through, here we go, localhost port 3000. We can go ahead and actually interact with our front end application here. So as this completes, I'll go ahead and inject that variable as soon as the front end comes up here. And then I'll punt it over to Gabriel to actually show you guys hopefully some more interesting stuff, talk about some unit tests, and actually show you guys a bit more of an involved front end and a full stack application. So being patient, this is taking its time, but this should ultimately manifest here, hopefully within the next 5 to 10 seconds. So exercising patience. Okay, so there we go. Here's our front end written in React. We see that we have our MetaMask Ethereum address with the private key held inside the plugin. And now we can just go ahead and upsert a new value, give it 5, for example. Go ahead and invoke that. This again will integrate with MetaMask. Go ahead and confirm that transaction. And then the event should emit, and we should be able to see the new stored value that exists on Kaleido. So boom, right there. Lastly, we can close this, hop back into our data explorer right here. Apologies for hopscotching between the old console and the new console, but I'm very keen to demonstrate the new console just because it's very slick and very next gen. But here's our initial migrations and deployments, and then there's our invocation of that positive integer to simple storage. So that's my portion of the demo, albeit not terribly interesting, hopefully a good 101 walkthrough of Truffle and Kaleido. So I'm going to turn it over to Gabriel now, who's going to actually talk you guys through 2 components here. One of the demos that we've built in Kaleido that has given us a lot of runway, is this private document or private data exchange demo. And this is applicable to myriad industries. We could think about this in the healthcare industry. We could think about this in real estate or pharmaceutical trials. Any scenario where data needs to be privately exchanged with members in your business network, but it also needs to be referenced on the blockchain, whether for indelibility or whether for just publishing of that data, whether you want to make something for sale or available for purchase, for example. And what this demo does is this integrates a lot of those full stack components in Kaleido. Namely, it uses our document store service. And this is a twofold service. This allows you to integrate your existing private data with an AWS S3 bucket or Azure Block container. Kaleido will hash this data for you, allow you to reference that data on chain with whatever metadata you want. But it's also a secure pipe. So this uses Apache Kafka, and it allows you to securely transfer private pieces of data to other members in your business network. So this is going to use compression, sharding, chunking, asymmetric encryption, and it's going to give you that reliable transport to other members of your business network. And what our demo does is it shows a scenario where you have 3 different organizations. Someone's going to publish a piece of private data with some metadata alongside of it. And then another organization using token economics is going to purchase that data. It's a rather complex demo though, and there's a lot of things that the smart contract prevents you from doing. For example, the hashing algorithms are deterministic. So the smart contract prevents you from, uploading the exact same payload onto the blockchain. Even if you give it different metadata or a different name, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to rate a piece of data twice. You're not allowed to purchase a piece of data if you have a delinquent token balance, and a few other scenarios as well. So what Gabriel's done is he's written the solidity logic, but he's also written a number of unit tests that help identify those gotchas or those edge scenarios where your smart contract or your application might not function as expected. And I believe he's written a bespoke little piece of code for this demo and not showing the the full tranche of what we've done with the marketplace demo. But in any event, that's sort of the idea going forward as I punt it over to Gabriel. Show you guys an application, show you some solidity logic, and show you some Truffle unit tests. So with that, I will stop sharing and we'll transfer to Gabriel. And when he's done, then we will turn it over to the actual star of the show, Kevin from Truffle. So Gabriel, over to you.
Awesome, thank you, Nick. Okay, so I'm showing here my development environment. I'm using the VS Code editor. And like Nick just described, we're going to use the marketplace demo. This is actually a version that I wrote specifically to showcase how we write the unit tests. So let me do a quick walkthrough of the files that I have in this project. We can also make this project available after the talk. So this is basically a package. I created this package JSON file, and the dependency that I added is Truffle. So getting that installed is very easy. You just do an npm install Truffle, and I put it as a dev dependency. So you do save dev. And of course, I already have it here, so no need to install it again. And this is all that I need for now. And here, what I have is a folder called Solidity. And inside that folder, I have 2 subfolders. The first one is where I store my contracts, and the other one is where I store my tests. Now, one very important file that has to be located in this folder is this Truffle config. Now, I'm using this template that basically uses a number of customizations that are available. I'm leaving all of them in their default values because I'm going to be using Ganache for this. So basically, it's the tool that you can run and you can then test your code with it. So let's take a look at the marketplace smart contract. So this is a Solidity file. I'm going to zoom in. Hopefully, it's big enough to be clear. Okay. So here's my marketplace smart contract. It's very simple. This smart contract is going to store entries, and each entry in the marketplace is going to have a description that is basically just a string. Now, whenever someone adds a new entry to this marketplace, we're going to emit an event. That event is going to be called entry added, and it's going to contain 2 pieces of information. One is going to be a hash that we store as a bytes 32, and that's going to be the key to identify the marketplace entry, and the other one is going to be the description. Now, like Nick mentioned, we can use off-chain storage, services like IPFS or document exchange in order to save our files off-chain, and then all we have to do is store on-chain the hash that uniquely identifies that off-chain document by its content. So that's what we're doing here. Finally, we have a mapping that is going to give us from a key, that is the byte 32, the hash, to the entry, which contains the description. And this is going to be a private item called entries. So we essentially have two methods, one to add an entry and the other one to retrieve an entry. Let's take a look first at the function to add an entry. So the signature is very simple. We take the key, which is the hash, and we take the description. And here are a couple of interesting things. First, we require that the description cannot be the empty string. And if it is, we basically return that error. The other thing, like Nick mentioned, we are going to require that each entry is unique. So if someone tries to submit an entry, basically to add a new entry to the marketplace that had already been added before, we also want that to be stopped and an error returned saying that that entry already existed. Now, if these two conditions are satisfied, then we go into the next line and we just add the entry to our map, and then we emit the event. So that was the add entry function. Let's take a look at the get entry function. So this one is very simple. It simply takes the key of the entry that we want to retrieve. It's a view, it doesn't make modifications, it just returns a value, which is going to be a string called description. And once again, we run here a requirement making sure that the entry exists. And finally, we return the description of the entry. Now, a very important thing is that when we write our business logic in a smart contract, we want to make sure that it works properly, because once the Solidity code is complete and we start building the rest of the application around it, if we later discover that there was a problem with the Solidity code, then it could be quite costly to go back and fix it. And it could be even worse if we discover that there were problems with the Solidity code once we have pushed things to production and it's up and running. So we are going to write unit tests using Truffle, and that is going to allow us to make sure that the Solidity code is solid. So for that, we have here the folder test, and we wrote a very simple file called marketplace. So for those familiar with Mocha, this is going to be a very familiar looking file. We basically are going to write the structure of the test in that same way, where we use describe and then each individual test. So let's take a look at how this file is structured. We first obtain the marketplace file, the Solidity file that we were just looking at. And we are going to declare a variable where we are going to store that contract. And before we execute any of our tests, we assign to that variable the contract itself instantiated. And here's where Truffle is going to help us a lot, because first of all, I'm going to start Ganache. And what this is going to allow us is that every time that I run the test, this is going to compile the contract, deploy it, and then run all of my tests against it. So let's take a look at the tests. I wrote here specifically these 3 tests because I think that these 3 tests are a great starting point when building your unit cases. Essentially, I think that in practice, most of the tests can be basically summarized as variations of one of these 3 tests that I'm going to show here. So let's see how that works. The first one basically tries to do something where the smart contract is going to cause a rejection, throw an error. So we want to make sure that if we do something that we are not supposed to, that the smart contract effectively stops us from attempting to do it. The other one is checking that the smart contract is emitting the events that we want. So if we invoke a method in the smart contract that should emit an event, then we want to check that that event is emitted and that it has the correct information. And finally, we have a test that basically checks that if we invoke a method in the contract that should return a value, that the value is the one that we expect. So let's take a look at this a little bit more in detail. So the first one is basically saying that if I am going to add an entry with no description, then that should throw an error. So remember, in our smart contract here, it says that the description cannot be empty. So if we run this test, this is going to throw an exception, and then we check that the exception contains that information that is being written in the smart contract. Then the other test is going to be adding an entry, and then we're going to have here, we are going to declare a hash. This is just a random hash that I generated just for test purposes, same as this one. And we are going to invoke the add method, and then we are going to capture from the transaction the event, and we are going to check that the event has the information that we expect. So in this case, remember, the event emits the key and the description. So here we are going to check that the key and the description are in the event. And finally, we're going to try to retrieve the entry that we added in the previous test. And we are going to check that the value that is returning is the one that we expected, which is basically the one that we added before. So to run this test, you simply have to run Truffle test. This is going to compile the contract and then run the tests against it. So here we have the 3 tests passing. Now, there's one case that we didn't consider here, and it's the one that Nick actually mentioned. What happens if I try to add the same entry twice? The smart contract should stop that. So, like I said, it's usually a variation of one of these 3 test cases. So in this case, we are going to try to do something that we're not supposed to. That's going to throw an error. So let's take this one as the starting point. So what we are going to do is we're going to write a new test. And what we are going to do in this test, we are going to try to add the entry that we added here one more time. So I'm going to put the same hash to make sure that we're trying to do that. And I'm going to make sure that we also include a description, because otherwise it would throw a different error saying that the description cannot be null. Okay, so here's a key thing. This should also be updated, because now the error that is going to be thrown is not going to be description cannot be empty. It's going to be that I cannot add the same thing twice. But let's purposely run the test now to see that we should get a failure because of that. So I'm going to run the test again. The first 3 tests should still pass, but the 4th one should fail. And there we go. So what happened? It said that I was expecting the description cannot be empty, which is, because I copied from the other test. And what it actually returned is entry already existed. That's exactly the error that I was really expecting. Now, another very interesting thing that you can do, in case you're using the Visual Code editor, you can also create, again, these files are going to be made available after the talk, a launch configuration that is going to allow you to debug your tests. So let's say that I'm in the middle of writing a test and I don't know exactly why something is happening. So all I have to do is add a breakpoint here, and then I can go and debug my test. So this is going to do the exact same process, but it's going to stop at the breakpoint. There we are, and now I can hover and see, this is the reason my test was failing. This is what was coming back, and that's what I was expecting. So if I copy this, and I update my test, because this is what I really was expecting, then I should be able to just now save the file, run the test again. I'm going to clear the breakpoint, and now we have all of the tests passing. Okay, and those were the main 9 tests that I wanted to show. It's really easy to write this unit test with Truffle, and it really helps you make sure that the Solidity code works properly, and you should really have this test cover as much of the code as possible before moving on to the next phase. Okay, and with that, I complete my part of the presentation, so I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Gabriel. That was fantastic. Really appreciate that. One of these upcoming weeks too, I promise I'll actually resurface the front end of that demo, but that was perfectly articulated about the value of the solidity logic and the tests, and taught me a few new things about the unit tests as well inside of VS. So thanks for that, Kevin. Looks like we've left you with not quite as much as I promised, but about 24 minutes. So I'll give you the remainder of the hour, and yeah, all you.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Thanks, Nick. Thanks so much. Well, great to be here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen and hear me? Okay. All good. Yeah. Any issues with seeing my screen or audio? Just shout. I'll keep an eye on chat. And same goes for questions and so on. Oh gosh. Oh, it's so typical. It says I've been signed out. just I'm about to start. Gosh, let me just, it's probably just the usual Google kind of rotation there. Okay, we're back in. Awesome. Yeah, so yeah, ignore that bit. So yeah, thanks so much again for having me. As mentioned, this is going to be a kind of, I guess, like a semi-deep dive into a few of the sort of lesser known features within Truffle. Specifically, what I was going to do, and I'm conscious of time, so I'll kind of speed up a little bit through some of it, was just give a quick overview of the suite, specifically the kind of 4 tools in the suite. A few of them already got touched on, so and I think most of the audience, or I would assume at least, has some familiarity with Truffle, but I'll do that just in case not, or in case you need a quick refresher. Then I actually just wanted to dive into both kind of some of the newer things within Truffle, and I put newish as well, just because one of the things I want to call out is something called ganache forking. Obviously, we touched on, we saw ganache earlier, but a feature that's been around for a while, hence the newish label, but isn't that well known is something called forking, and we'll see that when we get to it. A couple of new things, the multi-chain support, so we're no longer exclusively or intrinsically tied to Ethereum. And I'll touch on that and kind of both the existing support we have and kind of what's in the pipeline. Also Filecoin and IPFS integration. That's a very, very new thing, as in a few weeks old. We have a collaboration underway with Filecoin, and we've been doing some kind of work with that. And then finally, Truffle Teams, which is the newest addition to our suite. Yeah, and I'll kind of give some background on that. Then actually, the ones that I've called out in green here on the agenda were going to be demos, or are going to be demos. So again, time permitting, I'll kind of try and squeeze it all in. And then lastly, before Q&A, just ways in which you can get involved with Truffle, either through contributing to our open source tools, creating a Truffle box. Nick touched on a couple of those that Kaleido have in the list of boxes that we have, and something called Truffle plugins as well. And then obviously Q&A, and I'll keep an eye on questions as I go through as well. So, if you have kind of need quick clarification on something, just shout in the chat and I'll keep an eye on that. And I put a caveat there because I might have too much stuff. So I'll kind of speed up as needed and try and get through everything. Also, if you don't mind, I'm going to keep my slides on the right-hand side of the screen because I'm going to be jumping back and forth between VS Code and the slides. So the slides will kind of just be talking points, and I'll kind of jump into the demo stuff as mentioned. Also, I'm on a huge screen here, so it's kind of, yeah, hopefully it's not too bad and you can still see everything. Okay, yeah, so briefly about me, in terms of my title, Head of Curriculum Development and Training at Truffle. So as kind of Nick mentioned at the start as well, I write a lot of our curriculum and actually deliver that curriculum, both to kind of individual developers on the ground, as well as large corporations. So we do a lot of training kind of the enterprise level as well. I also get involved in our product development on the kind of code side as well. So kind of a mixed bag of things. And been in software, gosh, more than 12 years now, many different hats. And I put decentralization for the win because it's, as a paradigm, it's something I'm incredibly passionate about. And I think a kind of necessary thing, to kind of give some healthy counterbalance to, the kind of inherent centralization that we have today, which isn't inherently terrible, but, I think, having, options when building, sort of architecting solutions to, decentralize aspects of them is significant. So, hugely enthusiastic about the paradigm. Okay, so Truffle Suite itself, I'll go through this pretty rapidly just because, again, time, and we've kind of already covered it a little bit, but this is really designed as a kind of quick refresher if you've used Truffle a little bit in the past, or if you've never heard of Truffle or just heard of Truffle but never used it. So, what is Truffle as a suite of tools? Really taking this quote from our website, is, if you've got an idea for a decentralized application, it's really about the suite of tools that we have is designed to help you kind of along that journey to take it from an idea to the kind of realization of that idea as comfortably as possible. Comprised of a range of tools, stating the obvious, of course. And we've had many downloads of the suite of tools, not trying to kind of overdo the the numbers there, but that's it's kind of a widely used suite of tools and been around a while. And I put 100% open source. That's kind of largely true. All our major tooling is open source. The caveat to that is Teams, which is a SaaS product, so it's kind of closed right now. Elements of it may be opened up over time, so kind of watch this space. But in terms of our core tooling and everything you'll see, our Teams is open source today. Who's using Truffle? Across really companies across the spectrum. Large household name type firms through to really small startups in the space. And Nick kind of showed kind of how easy it is to get started. So again, I'll kind of whip through some of these quickly. The CLI itself, so jumping into the Truffle, Truffle as a tool, it's a bit confusing because we're kind of, the suite is called the Truffle Suite, and then within the Truffle Suite we have Truffle itself, which is a command line tool, and really as a tool itself is focused on the kind of life cycle, and Nick kind of touched on a little bit of that earlier, which was great. Currently at version 5x, and it's very actively maintained. We're on a kind of streak of way over, I think now, like 67 plus weekly releases. So there's a kind of weekly release cadence. And I just on this slide called out a few of the kind of commands which kind of highlight the different aspects of the development lifecycle, everything from initialization of a empty project through to unboxing a box, and Nick showed a couple, and I'll call that out specifically in a moment, through to the compilation, the running of tests, which Gabriel showed, debugging. And then ultimately migration either to your local instance if you're still kind of developing, or of course to public or private network or a consortium network, of course in the case of Kaleido. And there's more. That's just a kind of few of the commands that are more commonly used, at least. Quick side note on boxes. Obviously we saw them earlier. They're awesome, particularly if you're kind of getting started in this space. They're designed either, mixed bag, but either from a kind of they're great from a learning standpoint. You can kind of download them and play around with the code. A lot of them, if not all of them, have decent readmes to kind of help you spin stuff up, as well as actually just kind of kickstarting real projects as well. You could use it as a boilerplate for that. We have 3 flavors of them. The official ones that we as Truffle maintain. So if there's breaking changes in our tooling, we'll kind of update them accordingly. We have partner ones, as we saw. Kaleido is a partner, and have boxes in there. And community ones. You have this long tail of community ones. People out there that have perhaps created a project that they're happy to share with the community, and we'll kind of get it listed up there. We are moving to a kind of weekly kind of release cadence. We're going to be doing a new series around called the unboxing series. So anytime we have a new box, we'll kind of try and showcase it in conjunction with the partner or ourselves if it's one that we're putting out there. And links as well. I think Nick mentioned we'll get the slides over, but trufflesuite.com/boxes, and you can kind of see the full list there or filter based on what you might be looking for. And just some of these slides I'm going to skip over just because of speed, but we have many different types, focusing on different aspects of things through like tokenization, through front end, etc. Okay, Ganache, again, we saw it briefly earlier on. It's really best thought of as a personal blockchain, that you can spin up locally, really designed for development and test. It's not something you would ever run as a live node in any capacity. It's not designed for that, but it's super fast, and blocks are mined instantly, and optionally mined instantly, or at least by default. So yeah, everything around it is designed for making the development side of things a lot easier. Comes in 2 flavors. So there's a GUI based version, as I think Gabriel pulled that up earlier on. which is really, really good for kind of getting started, just because you can visually explore everything. You can see the contents of the blocks or the transactions within the blocks, any events that have been emitted, the contracts themselves, and the state within those contracts. So yeah, really nice, and kind of holds your hand with kind of familiarizing yourself with the kind of composite parts of of what you need to be aware of. And then we have a CLI version, and I'll actually show that shortly. Drizzle, again, we saw it briefly, and really, in a nutshell, that's a React / Redux based framework for building the front ends. It's not wildly heavy in any sense, but it just simplifies the synchronization of your contract state down to the browser. So historically, if you want, you could of course still use Web3 or Ethers to get at that, but there's kind of overhead, kind of boilerplate code that you'd be writing, and particularly for just kind of the rolling synchronization of that. That's something that we handle, or is handled by Drizzle. It syncs it to a local Redux store, so you can kind of get it as you need it and reactively update your UI. And last but not least, in terms of the 101 or the overview, is Truffle Teams. And again, new product, or relatively new. And again, we're super pumped about this, and it's really designed for the kind of DevOps side of things. If you look at, you can see that little graphic on the right-hand side there. Historically, we've just focused, by we as Truffle, or specifically the suite, is focused on the kind of left-hand loop. So the coding, the building, the testing. We've never really had any, there's kind of caveats to that, but a kind of comprehensive story for the right-hand side, for things like release management, visual deployment, making that deployment process easier, because it can be kind of cumbersome. And then just kind of the general monitoring of things, and more, and again, I'll briefly show this later. So yeah, it's kind of filling in bits that we, or blanks that we, kind of inherently had in the suite. Cool. Okay, so that is a very brief, high-level tour of the suite and the kind of component parts. What I wanted to do now is jump into some of the newer things, or again, newish, because the one I'm about to show isn't brand new, but just less known. And just to recap what that one is Ganache forking. Before I jump to the left-hand side of my screen, what is forking? And really, it's the ability to take a snapshot or fork of another chain. So that can be, testnet, public network, the mainnet. Or it can be or any network, it could be just another network, blockchain network on your, existing network, or it could be a Kaleido node, which is what I'm about to show. It's really analogous, I think, or a good way to visualize it mentally is think of it as a Git repository that you've forked. So imagine you click that fork button on GitHub, you get a copy of it, and specifically a repository that you don't have you don't have write permissions back to. So when you at that point, once you forked it, you essentially own that fork. But you can't write back by design, because you don't have permissions to it, and you can't edit the commit history. I mean, you can kind of, but for all intents and purposes, if you can't, you just think of it like that. And that's similar to forking. You're going to snapshot another network, and you can interact with it as much as you want. But you can't, as I say, write back to the source network or origin network that you forked from. Now, why would you want to do this? Really, it's for kind of development / production parity, because particularly when you're doing tests against things, or you often, or if you're building like a DeFi project, for example, and you want to compose against or build against a Uniswap or whatever DeFi service, you ideally want to be working with the real data. So forking allows you to do that and snapshot against it, and then build against those contracts. And that might be getting like live price data, etc. The alternative ways would be to take copies of those contracts, and or work against testnets, assuming those contracts have been deployed to testnets. But they both have, and again, there may be cases why you still want to do that, of course, but they have kind of limitations. Firstly, they may not be deployed to the testnets. Equally, if you're taking copies of those contracts, then there's no data. So I've seen projects where people have kind of created these pretty elaborate scripts to kind of to load up mirror similar data to what's essentially on mainnet in the case of a DeFi project. And availability, I just kind of put it down there, has been in Ganache for a while, and it's something we have in Truffle Teams, which I'll show later. And it's really easy to use. But now let's shift to, I kind of wanted to demo it. Let me just pull up the things I was going to show for my note reference here. So yeah, this is kind of seeing in action, and I think it's pretty neat. And in this case, I've mocked up running it against a Kaleido node. So let me just, I might need to re-log back in here because I'll show a few things. So I've spun up a node or an environment, sorry, specifically on Kaleido. And if we just keep an eye on this transaction log on the right here, and then what I'll do is, and this is going to be really hard to see, so I'll kind of just talk through it. But in the left-hand side now, in the left middle, I'm going to open up a development console to the Kaleido environment, which I've called Origin in terms of my Truffle config. Let me just kind of crank this up. Oh yeah, and I said to Nick earlier, I've got some weirdness going on in my VS Code right now, because when I increased the font size, it ground my machine to a halt. And I've got a decently spec'd out machine, so I've got some weirdness. That's why I haven't cranked up the size, FYI, but I'll talk through it. So if you can't see it, apologies, but you're not going to miss a ton. But what I've done here is I've opened up a console to the Kaleido environment that I spun up. It's like Geth POA. So then what I'll do is just create a connection essentially to that. Specifically the simple storage. So we've got a nice kind of segue from Nick's demo earlier. So I've created an instance of the deployed simple storage contract, and I'll just set that value to say like 42. Well, actually I'll do it to something that's 101, because so what we should see on the right hand side is, yay, there we go. So we should see a new transaction flow in. Awesome. So I set that to 101. And there's the corresponding transaction on, let's think of this. This could be our live Kaleido environment, for example. Now, if you shift your attention to the little panel down here on the left console, again, it's very hard to see. I'm going to open up a fork instance, or create a fork from the Kaleido environment. By the way, I didn't mention this. All the code, I've created a repo for this. So if you do want to try this out yourself, by all means. Then I've created, and I did hopefully a decent README. You can see there as well with all the. I mean, obviously that's not going to be as easy to read because it's just the raw markdown. But so yeah, anyway, so now we've created a fork of that node, or the environment. Now what I'm going to do is open up a console to the forked instance. So I call that network fork in my Truffle console. That's where my Truffle config. There we go. So now what we can do is get another instance of that contract. Simple storage and deployed, and then we should be able to see the same value. Ooh, oh, sorry, missed the equal there. And then x.get this time. So now this is just, if you kind of cross-reference this config up here, we've just connected to this local forked Ganache instance. So we've taken a snapshot essentially of this environment. So if I do get on there, we should see it's a big number that's returned, but it's 101, which is what we set it to. And then now if we do x.set again and set it to 42, again, apologies if you can't see that, but I'm essentially creating another transaction against the forked instance, forked Ganache instance. See the same thing, the receipt, the transaction hash, etc. But what we don't see is anything on the right-hand side there, and that's because we haven't written anything back to Kaleido here. We've written it back to a snap, essentially the same things, taken a, and by the way, it doesn't take the entire chain, because if you're running against a fork of mainnet, I think, kind of running in archival mode right now, it's like 4 terabytes. So you're not like, it's not kind of behind the scenes pulling that down, but what it's doing is kind of querying kind of behind the scenes to get the corresponding, transaction, but not explaining that very well, but only executing it against your local Ganache instance, in case you're wondering. So as you can see, that's really, really neat from a kind of testing perspective, particularly if you want, if this was a live environment that, you had a ton of contracts on and a lot of activity going on, and you wanted to, work against that, be that writing tests against, oh, and by the way, when you do create the fork, and I've got a little blob of code here that does it, if you don't specify the block number, then it will just take it from the latest, but you can specify a block number as well. So if you want to test against a specific block, then you can do that. So really neat, across the board, and particularly, both I think from a kind of testing against, your perhaps an existing environment that you might have, but also for, work, if you're kind of composing something, where you want to work against, a mainnet, for example, or any other network that you have permission to access. Cool. I'll keep an eye on questions as well. Just so please close the VC screen. Was that directed at me? Oh, visual code screen. Visual code. Yeah. Sorry for. I don't know if I'm going to keep. If you don't mind, I'm going to keep it open because I'm actually maybe there isn't anything more I'm going to be showing here for a little while. So yeah. Okay. Let me just. I can probably go full screen now actually because I know. Apologies if that was tricky to. Well, but A, if that was getting in the way, and B, if it was tricky to see that earlier. Cool. All right. So yeah, that was the link if you want to try that yourself. I'll just throw that in the chat while we're at it. Oops. Oh, that was Q&A. Sorry, not the chat. There's the chat there. Just throw that in there to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. Yeah. Cool. All right. I'm conscious of time. So Nick, is it okay if we kind of roll for a little longer? Just, I think we're going to go over the allotted time.
Yeah, let's do it. And if folks need to drop at the top of the hour, just to reiterate, this is going to be recorded. We'll disseminate it to everyone that registered, not even just attended. So carry on, Kev. Doing great.
Great. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. I'll try and keep it, not just meander far, way too much over. But all right, let me go ahead and full screen this now as well. This will hopefully help with seeing stuff. So, okay. So multi-chain support. So next I'm just going to kind of talk through, and then we're going to jump into Teams and have a quick look at that as well. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we are now multi-chain. So we're no longer intrinsically tied to Ethereum, and we still treat Ethereum very much as a first-class citizen. But I've just called out from our documentation here, the chains that we now have support for. So Quorum's been there for a while, but what's a bit newer is newish is the Hyperledger Fabric, or EVM-based instant edition of that. But the newest of all is the Tezos and the CORDA support. Again, if that's something that's kind of on your radar and you want to check out, have a look at our docs, and we have really nice ways to get started with exploring those. I particularly wanted to call out the CORDA because, and that was new to me, that you guys, Nick, Kaleido, have support for that as well. So when I kind of was spinning up this environment for the previous demo, I was like, oh wow, you guys have support for CORDA as well, which is awesome. So some good potential workflow sort of joining the dots there, because the support that we have is really about spinning up a local CORDA environment. And I've just kind of thrown down a list of features, which is going to be very hard to read, but reasonably comprehensive. You can see the nodes, see the all the transactions. We provide a shell access to all the nodes as well, and the log, all the logs and so on. And again, some decent kind of getting started guides, which will also kind of walk you through just familiarizing yourself with CORDA as well. So hopefully some pretty nice workflow now. If you are exploring CORDA, because you can do this from a dev perspective, and then when you're ready to kind of graduate that up to production, or even staging, UAT, etc., then Kaleido have you covered there. Just a couple of obligatory screenshots of it where you can see within Ganache UI here where you can spin up a CORDA environment. Okay, that was a brief one. Also, what's new, and this is definitely new, is our Filecoin IPFS integration. If you're not familiar with Filecoin and or IPFS, IPFS itself is a decentralized storage platform. Where think of it as like AWS S3, but rather than it being concentrated on Amazon's environments, it's kind of the community, or people putting their own storage into the network. A really amazing thing. Filecoin, as a complement to that, provides an incentivization layer for it. So because perhaps the initial question is, which is one that I used to have when when it first kind of got released, maybe many years ago now. It's like, why? Not why, because I can see the value, but what's going to motivate me to kind of give up a ton of disk storage and so on. So Filecoin kind of solves that by providing a incentivization mechanic to do so. So yeah, and as mentioned, we have some pretty decent support emerging for that. And this is a precursor to Truffle 6, but this is kind of ready to start testing if you're interested. And again, a good kind of blog post which announces this, both the collaboration with Filecoin and some of the support that we currently have and the roadmap as well. The kind of command that we're calling it is Truffle Preserve. It says preserves there the distribution. So if you did want to install the version of Truffle that has that, you can see the command there. And then we actually have a box for it as well. So a pretty simple example just to kind of help you, throw up any assets that you wanted to, decentrally store. And then you can choose what we have what's called a recipe as well. So you can choose kind of the Filecoin approach, and because they're still on like testnet phase, so it's not kind of ready, but you can it still works, but it's not kind of going to have the storage guarantees and so on yet until it goes rolls out to mainnet. But if you want to kind of put it on IPFS now and perhaps use a pinning service, or pin it yourself, so it's going to hang around, then you can choose the IPFS recipe. So we're super excited about that, and kind of as again a new thing to Truffle that we kind of haven't had a story for before. All right, just keep an eye on. Oh no, sometimes there we go, full screen chat. Okay, cool. That's just from you, Nick. Alrighty, cool. So yeah, Truffle Teams. As mentioned, this is the newest tool in our suite, and something we've been working on for a while, and super excited about. And really, what it does, or the value it adds, or designed to add, and is the kind of, as mentioned earlier, the kind of right-hand side of this kind of development lifecycle. Historically, Truffle, Ganache, Drizzle, been kind of had your back there on the left-hand side, but we've never really had anything too compelling, on the kind of DevOps piece, a kind of story there. Everything as mentioned earlier, from like release management, making deployments easier, because Truffle Migrate, it works, but and it's okay, but it doesn't give you kind of much kind of historic reference as to the deployments that you put out there, and then more specifically the general ops side of things, monitoring of transactions. Oh, I saw a comment there from Spiros. Slides do not fit into my window, at least. Oh, hopefully they're not too badly cut out. I can always go back if give me a shout if it's really drastic. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
No, they look good, Kev. Just press forward.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you. So a few features that are live today on Teams, and I'll quickly demo a few of these. A couple of them is continuous integration. So we saw the kind of testing process from Gabriel earlier, and that's perfect for kind of again doing it locally, and you could share that with your team. Obviously, if you're kind of storing your code in GitHub, and they could pull down your tests and make sure things aren't breaking, but it's not true CI. We have now again a story there. So if anything you do breaks, any commit that you put out that to your project breaks something, you're gonna be notified of that and be able to see who did it and so on, and obviously with the view to rectifying it. A much better story around deployments, and again I'll show this briefly. General monitoring of all the activity against your transactions on the networks that we support, and then something called Ganache sandboxes. So these are one-click sandbox instances in the cloud. So historically Ganache, as we've seen earlier as well, is just designed to run locally. Now you can kind of run a cloud-based version with just a single click, and kind of just share like quick and dirty things with your team. And then this is our pipeline. So I'll actually show the debugger as well. Again, conscious of time, so I'll try to do it quite quickly. Custom networks. So that's actually, I called that out. I called these, well, the top two out just because I'm going to show the debugger, but specifically custom networks is if you then, we're ready to deploy to Kaleido. Right now you actually can't, because we only support public networks or Ganache, or sandboxes. In the works is, the ability to, migrate to, a custom network, e.g. Kaleido, when if it was a private chain or a consortium chain. And then I won't read all these out individually, but, a whole kind of pipeline of new things that are actively kind of being worked on, going live soon. And we'd love your feedback on it as well, because it's a new product for us. So cool. So just a quick demo. With that, I'll break out of full screen again. Actually, maybe I don't need to, because I'm not going to be showing too much code here. But what I want to show, I guess I can, in fact, it won't be full screen. I'll just keep it like this because I'll be jumping between a few different tabs. So what I'll show quickly is the CI. Specifically, I've broken simple storage if that's possible, but I'll fix it, with a quick click. And then I'll show, again, I'll perhaps pare it back a little bit just because of time, but I'll show sandboxes, and I'll probably just jump straight to the debugger. But either way, let's jump in. So yeah, I'm at Teams now. Let me just move a few things around here. Okay, so we can see if I go into my builds list here, you can see well, the commit message was, oops, breaking again for demo. So actually this is where I tested this a few times before. And this is actually on the, another box, Truffle React box that we have. Again, it just has simple storage as the contracts, because this one's really about the React front end, as a box at least. And here's the code for the simple storage. And you can see here I inadvertently broke it. So this actually caused the test to fail, because whatever we set X to be, set stored data to be, it wasn't, when the test ran, which is actually testing that it is the value you stored it at, it was not, because I was inadvertently adding on 42. So if I go ahead and just I'll just inline update it in GitHub itself. Oops, let's just go ahead and fix it. Woohoo. So yeah, as per kind of any CI service, if you upon commit, the webhook is sent to Teams, and we can see that the build is in progress and the execution of the tests is in progress. If you click into it, you can actually see all the output from that. Yeah, so it's going to take a moment just because it has to spin up an environment, build the contracts, run the tests, and so on. But as you'll see in a moment, that will kind of fix itself. Well, not fix itself because I fixed it, but that will should be now showing all the tests have passed, which is awesome. So that's the CI. And again, I'm just going to kind of jump through these kind of quick. Next I wanted to show was the sandboxes, just kind of in the kind of logical order. As mentioned, these are just kind of one-click sandboxes. What's also, one-click ganache instances, we call them sandboxes. What's kind of neat as well, if you did want to, fork your sandbox, referring back to the forking that we saw earlier, off of any of the public-facing Ethereum networks, e.g. mainnet, and or any of the test nets, or forking from a ganache instance or ganache sandbox, then you can do that, which is really, really neat. Particularly, again, if you're building a kind of against the DeFi project, because to actually run forking, the nodes need to be running in like archive mode. So if you were to try and do that on the free tier of Infura, it wouldn't work. Or if your own node that is not running in archival mode, then you wouldn't be able to do it. So that's another kind of nice thing of the sandboxes there as well. So I've got 2 running already. Assuming that build is passed, yep, so all good. So now what I could do is go into my deployments, and I'm obviously in this repo, and I could go deploy this instance, this fixed instance of the contract to one of my, again, any network. If I selected one of the public facing networks, I'd need to, sign that transaction with MetaMask. So, kind of have built-in support for that. Now, if I'm just going to deploy that to a sandbox, that's not necessary. But again, I won't do this, but that would just deploy it to as you'd expect, which is great. And then I could, in my Truffle config, could just kind of work with that instance rather than my locally spun up ganache instance. Monitoring was the other thing I was going to quickly show. And then if I go, you can see this. If I just click into simple storage, it's 3 transactions. And again, these are just updates that I've done prior against setting simple storage, because that's the only thing that mutates the state. So that, but yeah, so that's that. And then kind of this is a sneak peek of the debugger. So I'll just jump into that here. And this is also a simple storage. This is running locally on my environment. So this isn't live yet. It will all going well be live next month. So you can see simple storage here. And so this is a different repository, different repo running in my local environment. If I just go back into deployments here, monitoring rather, and click into simple storage. I actually adapted simple storage to have like a means of causing a transaction to fail. So I'll go into this one. And you can see here, and then I can actually step through. So this would be, this is designed, but, to, again, any contract on any network, if public facing network, at least right now, I can then actually just go ahead and step into, and see it. Similar to what Gabriel showed in VS Code, but this allows you to do it retrospectively as well. Because you can, something might have failed, oh gosh, what happened? And this allows you to kind of just step in and see that, which is really, really awesome. And you can see here, it just gives me the exception up there. So again, this is very much a sneak peek, something where, it's not yet live, but imminently will be imminently live. So it's super excited about this. Cool. So that's, again, a kind of brief tour of Teams. If you want to try it yourself, because as I say, it's live, then you can go to my.truffleteams.com, or if I said that too fast, you can just go to trufflesuite.com and you'll see a Teams link from there. And with that, I'll jump back to full screen. Hopefully, was it spurious? You can still see everything just about. So yeah, just to kind of close out before we jump to any questions that folks might have, just ways to get involved with Truffle. So a few things. If you wanted to create a box, it's actually really, really easy. So if you have a project you've been working on, you think, oh, this would be awesome to open source and kind of share with the community. We have steps with which to do that here. It says advanced. I mean, it is, I guess, a little beginner, entry level folks wouldn't perhaps be creating one, but it's also not hard at all. Really, all you need in the root of a project is a truffle-box.json file, and then a little bit of metadata about, that contains a little bit of metadata about the box, and then a few images, that we show on the kind of listing page of the boxes. And we actually have a blueprint box as well. So if you want to clone this, then you can kind of edit it, as you see fit. But either way, super easy, and it's a great way to kind of give back to the community. And if there's a project you've been working on that you want to share, kind of out in the wild, then a box is a good vehicle for that. So that's boxes. Plugins. Actually, this slide I took from some other other decks, another deck. So I won't kind of go through this, but plugins are ways of extending Truffle's functionality, and it's something we're doing a bit more of a kind of push on at the moment. And again, really, really easy to both create one and similarly to consume and use one. If you want to use, and we have a handful of plugins that are out there right now, and hence why we're going to do a bigger kind of push on it. So if that's something of interest, if there's a thing, oh, it'd be great to kind of hook into kind of Truffle's like build pipeline or whatever it might be, integrate with a third-party service, or whatever, then a plugin is potentially a good candidate for that. So again, the kind of that's how you install it on this slide and kind of and then run it. And then for actually creating one is, we have, again, just like the boxes, we have some docs for, some reasonable docs on that. And I just kind of put up here a couple of example boxes that we have, like Mythex, which Nick referred to earlier, who do like vulnerability detection against smart contract vulnerability detection. They have a plugin that you can just kind of run Truffle run verify, and then that will kind of upload the contracts to Mythex and do the detection. We also have Etherscan source code verification. So if you want to put your contracts up on the Etherscan as verified, then we have a plugin for that. So yeah, and a couple of links there. If you don't get a chance to write them down, make sure you get the slides. And then finally, just contributing to Truffle itself, as mentioned, all our kind of desktop tooling, the Truffle CLI, Ganache, etc. Obviously, it's all open source. So if that's something you've got an idea you want to throw out there, or a fix or whatever, a thought, then feel free to get in touch with us. Or if you just want to kind of contribute, to help learn and get deeper into Truffle, any of the tools, if you go to GitHub, .com/Truffle Suites, that any of the repos under there, and then do a search under the issues for like good first issue or help wanted. There'll be some good ways to kind of get started if that's of interest, and we'll work with you. It's not like, hey, just work in a vacuum and try and figure it out. We'd love to, love folks getting involved. All right, so just to close out my section, if I just kind of threw this links in here, if you're kind of new to Truffle, some good ways to get started, or more broadly new to the space, to building contracts, etc. Our docs, the pet shop tutorial is a classic. We're actually revamping at the moment, but it's still a good way to kind of walk you through, familiarize yourself. Obviously the boxes, which we touched on. And then if you have some prior experience and you want to kind of jump into some of the things I mentioned in the session. Truffle Teams, there's a link to it. Again, huge long links here. Truffle, the IPFS stuff, or Filecoin stuff, and Filecoin stuff, and then the multi-chain support. It's all kind of listed under our docs there. And lastly, 2 things. If you want to get in touch with us, you can, by all means, come through me. Happy to kind of connect. I put my email address there. And then lastly, we have TruffleCon 2020. So this is going to be the 3rd edition of our yearly conference, which is now virtual, as are all conferences right now for obvious reasons. So it makes it easier than ever to attend. It's scheduled for the 6th and 7th of November later this year. So if you're interested in joining us there and kind of diving into all things Truffle and beyond, then feel free to kind of check it out and see if it looks of interest. All right, that's it. Any questions for anyone? And again, apologies for kind of overrunning a lot.
Yeah, I think it's all good, Kev. There was just one in the chat around getting the React components with the Truffle unbox command. So I wonder if you have a quick, succinct answer to that in the Q&A. You can see that.
Q&A, let me jump in. So what about Truffle unbox React? Do you say, Nick?
Yeah.
Is that the question? Yeah. So yeah, that should just work. Is that, assuming the question is like, does that work? Then yeah, what that command will do is, essentially, behind the scenes, really all it's doing is running a git clone against, a particular repository. And then you do and then it kind of automatically does any preset builds, installing dependencies, spinning up stuff. And it's just a nicer way of doing that. So yeah, Truffle Unbox React will install the React box, which contains like simple storage and a kind of React front end.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks for that, Kevin. So big shout to Kevin and Gabriel today for all of their contributions. I think today takes the cake for the most content we've ever covered in one of these Tech Tuesdays, but I actually learned a lot myself, so hopefully this was illuminating to all the folks in attendance. Really appreciate all the attendees. Hope everyone is staying safe, staying healthy. I shared some contact info in the chat. Kevin shared some on the slides. We will be sharing all the slides, all of the non-proprietary code that we've shared as well. That'll be in the email that's coming to you guys. And then please just stay tuned for more information coming out of Truffle and Kaleido. And next week or the week after, I can't confirm 100%, but we'll be showing Kaleido private stack. So show you guys how to run your own permission node, all the containers, all the HADR, on your own on-premise data center, on your laptop, or in a private cloud orchestration. So that'll be super cool. We've yet to show that before on one of these, so that'll be new content for everyone. So please don't hesitate to contact Kevin, contact myself. Please explore the Truffle docs, the Kaleido docs. Free to get started on Kaleido with a starter account. And as Kevin mentioned, it's just an absolute litany of open source material in the Truffle ecosystem to help you guys out as well. So one final thanks to Kevin and Gabriel and all the attendees. And stay tuned for more information coming out of Kaleido. Thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. Thanks, Nick.